Today I'm sitting down with Danny to talk about one of my favorite movies, Casino, the homage to 70s Vegas, starring Robert De Niro, Sharon Stone, and Joe Pesci. We'll see how Casino fits into Scorsese's impressive cinematography as one of his many films about the downfall of criminals. We'll go in depth on De Niro and Pesci's performances compared to Goodfellas, and how Sharon Stone shines in this tragic role. Finally, stick with us to the end to see Danny and I each draft our ultimate Vegas movies box set, and you get to decide your favorite. But for now, sit back, relax, and welcome to my film club. Danny, welcome to Dom's Film Club.
Thank you for having me.
So today we're going to do one of my favorite movies. As you guys know, sometimes we do my guests' favorite movies and sometimes we do mine, and today is a Dom one. We're doing the Scorsese 1995 gangster movie, Casino. Now, this is a movie I've probably seen about 15, 20 times, and it's truly special to me. And the time that I actually realized how much I loved it was I watched the whole thing. It ended, and I just watched it all over again. I spent 6 hours watching it. It's the only movie I've ever done that as an adult, and that's when I was like, there's something special about that movie. At the end, we'll say where it ranks as my all-time. And Danny, why? You're obviously a huge movie buff in general, huge fan of Scorsese. I gave you a list of movies that we could do together, and you chose Casino. So tell us about your relationship with this movie.
So I realized that when I rewatched it the other day, I'd probably not watched it for about 20 years. Was the last time I viewed it. But I'd grown up in sort of like my late teens is when I started finding more, I guess, like auteur type directors, and Scorsese was one of them. So Taxi Driver was the first Scorsese film that I watched. And then I just started going down the list of films that he's got. I feel like Casino was maybe one of the later films I watched as a teenager. And then I would have rewatched it again. So yeah, I used to have the same thing where I would rewatch films. Sometimes I would watch it one day and then watch it the next day. I think this was one of those ones. And then, just not rewatched it again for about 20 years. So coming into the rewatch, I sort of realized that there wasn't much memory I had from it. You know, like with some films, there's like, I can remember this exact quote, I can remember this image. And I was going into it going, it's like, going into it, I was like, it's like a sort of Goodfellas sort of sister film type film.
It kind of actually, Goodfellas is because when I watched it, I was an early adult, and I'd seen Goodfellas. I like Goodfellas. I would put Casino above it for me personally, but that's just because my relationship with it. I'm not saying it's a better movie, but it really feels like it is a multiverse thing. It's like a multiverse branch of Goodfellas, which is nice because I remember when I discovered it, I was like, wait, is like another Goodfellas that takes place in Vegas? Yes, sign me up. So next thing, up until now, we obviously haven't said anything about the story. I like to do the first 5-10 minutes of the podcast as spoiler free. So that someone can watch this that maybe hasn't seen it like you, but doesn't want to have it spoiled, or someone who has never seen this movie and they get to decide if they want to actually pause the episode and go watch it. So what would be your spoiler free description of this movie?
What are you asking me? You're the businessman. So it is about the mob, and sort of the wider verse is, you could say it's sort of a mob film, and that sort of infiltration of the casinos in Las Vegas. And then they've instructed a guy to basically run the casino unofficially for him. I can't remember what his job description is. It's like,
so he's running the casinos. You're absolutely right, on behalf of the mob. But he has, one of the jokes is that he's constantly changing his official job description. But if you want, that's a good description. So it's two things. I mean, it's about three things. It's about the mob, it's about Vegas, and then it's about the relationship between the Robert De Niro mob character, the Joe Pesci mob character, and Sharon Stone, who is married to Robert De Niro. Some more information about the movie. So it was released in 1995, one of Scorsese's big movies, 5 years after Goodfellas. Just like Goodfellas, it was based on a book by Nicholas Pileggi. In the case of Goodfellas, he'd written Wise Guys, which Scorsese then found and then adapted. In this case, Scorsese actually heard of the book being written before the movie came out, and he actually asked him, can you wait until the movie is released based on the book before releasing the book? The book was released a month before the movie, so basically released at the same time. So very much in the same vein, and one of the reasons why it's so stylistically similar, as well as having many of the same actors, is because it was made by the same director and based on the same writer. So I read this book thinking it would be vaguely based on it. Some of it is literally scene by scene. And honestly, some of the craziest stuff that happens in the movie is real. And we'll be talking more about that. It was released in Thanksgiving 1995, and it grossed $116 million worldwide against a $40 or $50 million budget. So, box office success, but it's not like it time tens its budget or anything. By my math, that means that it was seen by about 26 million people at the time. And based on Concave Brand Tracking's viewership metric, it's been watched by well over 500 million people to date. So it's definitely not one of Scorsese's like top 3, 4, 5 movies, but I'd say it's probably top 10, and it is like quite famous. Partly because it's bringing together the same cast, partly because it's an iconic Vegas movie. It was critically acclaimed. Here for all the episodes, we do a thing where the guest guesses the Rotten Tomatoes score and the IMDb score.
Okay.
So maybe you've checked it, maybe you haven't. We'll pretend that you haven't. Rotten Tomato score?
So I don't think it would be in the 90s. I think it'd be like 85%.
78% by the critics. And IMDb?
I think that might be a bit higher. 8.9?
8.2.
Oh, okay.
But 8.2 puts it the 142nd all-time list on IMDb, because it is very hard to crack that 8+. And the movie was nominated, the main award consideration that it got was Sharon Stone won the Golden Globe for Best Actress, and she was nominated for Best Actress at the Oscars, but it didn't win any. So definitely not as successful as some of Scorsese's other movies. So the last question before we hit the spoiler line is, and we can both answer this, is who should watch this movie? What mood? Who would you recommend it to?
So it feels like a bit of like a dad film, I think, in a way. That dad genre of cinema. I feel like it's like a Saturday afternoon dad type film. But I don't think it's anything it doesn't go anything like, it's not like an art house type film. So I think it could be enjoyed broadly by most people. I think fans of like crime. Also, I feel like it has a bit of a condensed sort of HBO limited series type vibe to it as well. So that sort of like adult drama.
That's actually a great point. We'll talk again about the format, and this is definitely something that could be watched in chunks. And it does actually, it does feel like that. I would love to see a 5-hour series based in like this world. Basically, same as they should have done with Killer of the Flower Moon. They should have just broken it down.
No. That's a perfect film.
Has Yaz watched it?
No.
Because this, like, Sunita isn't the biggest fan of, like, hardcore, like, gangster movies, but she'll basically watch them when they're of a certain quality, and she's seen this, I think, once. I think she was like, no, that's fine, I don't need to rewatch it, but I think it is something that the ladies would enjoy. They can enjoy it. They probably will not watch it as much as us. I put it as a fun, gritty movie that will keep you riveted, make you laugh, keep you entertained, and will transport you to 70s Vegas. You also learn, one of my favorite things is learning how the casinos actually work. That's probably more of a boys thing. And how the mob worked. And I'd say, like you say, this can be not indie, but like this is a good quality movie that you could watch with like your partner, or like, go on a date if you're seeing it at the cinema. But I also think it's the sort of thing that, like, if you and I were just hanging out, having some drinks and putting it on in the background, chatting over it when the boring stuff is happening, and then be like, wait, this is the part where Joe Pesci makes someone's head explode. Which is actually the first spoiler. So from now on, this is the spoiler line. So now we're going to talk openly about the beginning, the end, what happens to the characters, everything. So hopefully we've made a compelling argument that you should pause right now and go watch this movie for the first time, maybe rewatch it, and then come back to us and basically go through this movie, go through the things we liked, the things we didn't, talk about some of the history, the true events, how Scorsese made it, and all that sort of fun. So now is the spoiler line. You've been warned. So now that we're past the spoiler line, let's start with the entertainment value, because for me, any movie that you really enjoy, before anything else, it has to entertain you. What sort of entertainment does this movie provide you?
So me personally, on this being maybe the third or fourth time I watched it, I found the first hour quite hard to get through.
Really?
Maybe, I think, when I mentioned earlier about the HBO limited series thing, this feels like a bigger story than a film. So I feel like the first hour, I might be wrong, but it feels like there's not many minutes that go by without constant narration and
That's
like
true, yeah.
montage, because I guess it's setting up like the mob side of things. It's setting up these individual characters, but then it's setting up the wider sort of universe and like the business of casinos. Was the first time I sort of noticed my like sort of like drifting around. I guess in the first hour as well, there's nothing in the first hour that people bring up as being like with the head thing, like that. None of that's in that first hour. So all the stuff that people remember for it or talk about, it seems to be in the last 2 hours. And then after about an hour in, the style changes a little bit, and it sort of slows down, and all the scenes breathe a little bit more. There's less needle drops in the last 2 hours as there is in the first one. Yeah, because it's just like narration, music, like bang, 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 bang. Here's people counting money. It's all that sort of stuff. And then in the last 2 hours, it really starts to like open up, and you start to get to know the characters a little bit more. And then from then on in, it becomes really like compelling to me. So that was the only thing I noticed on this one. It was just like I was so frustrated in the first hour. And then in the last 2 hours, I was like really compelled and wanted to know. But also, as a side note, watching it, I was just like, I can see why Dom loves this film. Because take the mob stuff out of it, it's like a business film. So I was just like, Dom will love this stuff. This stuff.
So for the viewers and listeners out there, in context, Danny and I both love films passionately, but we come at it from like very different points of view. And I think this right here is a really interesting thing. We obviously both appreciate this movie. I think I probably like it more than you, but you you don't hate watching it or anything. But we like different things. So, and I'll give some nuance to it. I know that when I was younger and I watched it, I actually think the first hour was the thing I liked most because it's this super easy to digest, like exactly that. Very short scenes, constant music. Like I have my list of like some of my favorite scenes, and I'd say most of them are in the second 2/3, but there are a couple of just cool 30-40 second instances that happen in the first. I think one of the first ones is the whole Joe Pesci pen scene.
Oh yeah,
which happens like 20 minutes in or whatever. And that is like, that's such, I mean, it's not that it's fun to watch, but it just reminds you, because you probably remember that Joe Pesci's a bit crazy in this movie. And then you're like, oh no, he's like completely like bonkers. And so scenes like that. And yes, I think it's a very easy to digest thing, but I will admit that it is like a lot of movies will have 5 minutes at the beginning. They do that, and Scorsese just went, "No, I'm going to do an hour of just like constant intro." We can talk about this a bit more in the story, but I'll preface it by saying I do think one problem in this movie is that because it's based on a book, based on a true story, which the details are insane, but most of the details are true in this film. And he clearly felt the need to cram it all in. And I do think that hurts the movie a bit. And it's why there's so many things that they set up in that first hour. But honestly, we could probably even pick a couple, is that they could have stripped this out and they could have stripped that out. So it would help with it. But so that's interesting. So you see the beginning as a bit hard to get through, but then it sort of pays off because all the dominoes have been set, and then you just enjoy seeing the drama unfold.
Yeah, because the first one is also the bit where I feel like it's Scorsese being like bang, 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 like style. It's like overly stylized. It's like he's learned all these new tricks, and it's like, let's shove them all in now. And I think he was working with a new cinematographer for this film as well. So it's like they've tried to shove everything in. I guess it's almost, in like a side note, when watching the Austin Butler Elvis film, it felt like they'd really thrown like how many different styles of like camera like techniques can I throw in here, all the music, that sort of thing. I guess that worked for it on sort of like, it almost became sort of like a over the top like musical type vibe to it, and it feels like it's trying to do that where it's like it's trying to show all the excess of like Las Vegas. And obviously when you're going through, I've never been there, but I can imagine when you're driving down that strip that everyone knows, you've got all these lights, you've got all that, you've got all these things to look at. It's almost like the film's replicating that in that very first hour. And it was also, it sort of dawned on me that first hour really reminds me of Adam McKay's dramatic films. So like The Big Short and films like that, where it's very similar vibe to that very first hour, like loads of narration. Just loads of stuff happening, loads like all that, the business side of things. And then, it just, all of a sudden it just seems to stop, and it sort of like breathes a little bit after that bit. But like, how long is the book?
It's not like for a book. It's like 400 pages, so like normal length book. But it's a lot of detail.
Yeah.
And you need to introduce certain characters for something to make sense later on.
Yeah.
And they obviously didn't. Like again, we'll talk about it in the story, but there's a couple of things I can already say that I wish they'd like. It would have taken 12 minutes out of the movie, and they would have had to fix some things. But again, it's because those details are true. And I actually think one of the weaknesses of the story is that it overcomplicates itself.
Yeah.
But it's because it's based on the true thing, and then people could be criticized. Oh, you oversimplified it. But I definitely do think it's a very good example of sometimes you need to forget the source material and be like, we need to adjust this to actually make it more of a movie. But yeah, you can very much feel that it's based on a book. I will say another thing about that first hour. Again, it doesn't entirely surprise me that you had this take, but I think for your casual viewer who comes in and watches it, I think it does a great job at like bringing you in. Like it would be very hard for someone, unless they hate this type of movie, to watch this and not be like drawn in, because it is so easy again to digest. Like constant things happening. There's funny scenes, there's action, all the characters. Like you immediately want to find out more about them. But yeah, so you like the drama later on, but it starts with a sugar rush of just music, flashing montages, Scorsese having fun. I think it's definitely fun for the first half, and then it gets dark and gritty, but you're still like it's a roller coaster of a ride.
Yeah.
So yeah, anyone who enjoys movies, I think, would enjoy this movie. So moving on to the story, as I said, it follows this book very closely, and apparently most of the stuff in the book is real. And literally some of the craziest details, some of the stuff that you think, oh, well, that's got to be made up. It's true. If there's a detail in here that you think seems too crazy, it's probably true. An example is Robert De Niro constantly changing his title, which seems weird, but again, it's a weird detail, hence it's true, because as they say in the movie, that's how he got away with doing it without his license. His TV show, which is so strange. It's so strange. You can find it on YouTube. I'll put a clip on the side on the video that we do. But it's actually, the production values are even worse on the real one than the one that they show in the film, and it looks terrible in the film. The way the mob got busted with the whole the guy keeping records because he was pissed off about the thing. That's all true. And then the deaths. The wife of the Robert De Niro's character that he's based on did die at like 46 of like drug overdose.
The cop stuff as well.
Yeah,
like they're just like watching people speed on, and they're like, okay, we'll escort you, but you're drunk driving and you're high and you're speeding, but we'll take you there, and they're not doing anything about it.
That scene is so insane. Again, because I read the book like a year or two ago, I was like, I'm 100% sure that scene is true. And then the Joe Pesci character, I don't think the exact way he's killed, because you wouldn't know that. But he definitely did disappear and like got killed. So, and similar thing with all the mobsters going on trial. So yeah, crazy true story. But as I said before, I think they feel the need to put everything in. And I'll give you one example. We won't go through it all. Is the whole real estate guy behind it. The Philip Green, I think is his name. He's again one, they talk about him for maybe 45 seconds at the beginning with the flashes about, oh, he borrowed the money from the Teamsters that was actually the mob fronting it. And then there's a thing about how he then got sued by an old real estate partner, and and then she got murdered by the Joe Pesci character because she was getting in the way. And so I realized the reason they use that is because of that attention is when Robert De Niro starts talking to the press and says, I'm the boss, which starts a whole bunch of things. And then maybe there's another minute or two of the movie about that particular character, the Philip Green. But I really feel like that as one example, they could have written around. They could have just taken him out. Obviously, it's mostly true. It's in the book. So they were like, we're going to put it. But it's like, it's not adding anything to the story.
Yeah, because I guess you're sort of introducing a character for like a minute, and then she's gone the next minute. So it's not something, I guess you leave the action, just focus on something really small, and then you're back to
and like you said, because it's in this flash, it takes you watching a couple of times to even like understand it. At the end, when they kill everyone, basically, the fact that like even me watching it for the 15th, 20th time, part of it is because it's in the dark and stuff, but you don't know who half the people are. But they are all people that you saw before, and there was like some sort of backstory, like a couple of minutes. And And I think one of the important, this is why this is true. This movie is nearly 3 hours long.
Yeah.
It didn't need to be 3 hours.
Yeah.
This will leave more for the characters, but I do think they spend too much time on the Sharon Stone, Robert De Niro, like, fighting for, like, an hour and a half. Like, halfway through the movie, it's clear that they're fucked.
Yeah.
And then they just spend so much time devolving. And, we'll talk about it with her, because she is the best actor in this film.
Yeah, I think so. Easily.
So it's a very difficult thing to say. But you were talking about the drama in the second half. I do feel like that I'm like, oh God, we're doing this again. Here's a question for you. What do you think about the opening scene with the bombing, which is obviously the flash forward?
So the opening's like quite engaging instantly, but when he gets into the car, that jump cut is really, really obvious. Like it doesn't even feel like it's been composed the same way. No. The car moves slightly as well, and then you see like 1 second of a dummy, and then the car explodes. But then there's real fire in the car, and then it cuts to a shot where it's obviously like composited fire on top of the car, and it doesn't look real. And then it goes into like the credits are really long as well. It just feels quite sloppy for Scorsese, I think.
100% agree. Especially because even if it happened later, I think we would say, oh, the dummy thing, it looks cheap. Well, because again, this wasn't made in the 70s, even though it might look like it. This was made in the 90s, so I feel like they could have done better. And it is pretty much the opening shot. I can just imagine surely Scorsese when he was like, when they're premiering this, they watch it over and over. Surely every time he was like, oh, could have just spent $100,000 on like getting a better dummy.
Even if you got him going in the car and then just, I mean, you could even
different angle, or
you could even just cut to black, the sound of the explosion, and then go into the credits, or going above the car. I don't think you needed to see a dummy in the car, but it's so obviously a dummy as well. That's the weird part of it.
You haven't read anything about whether and again, you never know if it's 100% true in hindsight, whether he said, "Oh, we did it on purpose to like make it look a bit sloppy" or anything.
No, it doesn't ever get brought up, that opening, weirdly.
So totally agree on that. Let's put aside the execution of the opening scene. Do you think it's a good way to start the movie? Like the whole. Oh, this is what's going to happen. Now let's figure out how we got there.
Yeah. I think it's quite because that feels a bit more like old Hollywood, like 50s Hollywood, where you'd have like there's examples of like a narrator who is a character that's already dead, and then they're like, it's almost like how did this happen to me, and then it will go into like the backstory of it. So it is like quite a compelling opening, I think, and it also leaves an air of mystery because is he dead or is he not dead, that sort of thing. But I think it is really compelling. I just think maybe even just cut to black with the sound of the explosion.
I like that.
Would be really effective.
Scorsese, take notes. One so I think I don't love it as much as you do, but I'm okay with it. One thing that I don't like is, and this again is my whole thing about the Sharon Stone's character, is that he basically opens with like, I don't know if it's the first line or it's the last line before the explosion, but something about like basically love, like if you haven't got trust, you haven't got love, blah blah. And it almost like it really feels like there's a love, like it's a love movie shoehorned into a mobster movie. And I was thinking about the difference between this and Goodfellas. Obviously there are relationships in Goodfellas, but they are like not even second or third importance. They're completely in the background. They're kind of the marriages are all a joke. And ultimately this relationship is just as much a joke as anything like in Goodfellas or whatever. But it almost feels like because they got Sharon Stone and they were like, she's amazing, we need to like film extra scenes and stuff. I don't like the fact that they kind of start with that as the forefront, because this is a mob Vegas movie before anything else. So I've got my best scenes. So maybe I'll just rattle through them. And you can agree or disagree. And if I forget any, you let me know. Quite a few. A bunch of these are in the beginning, like that first hour. So I think the first time you see the count room, again, as a business guy, just seeing them count that money, but also it's just that kind of encompasses the whole thing. Like it's the money, it's being counted, and it's the mob guy just coming in the background and taking it, and that just really sets the scene. Then the pen scene immediately sets the scene of this guy's a psycho. But also, and this is more on rewatching it, Robert De Niro's reaction to it all, how blasé he is. I think there's like a shot that kind of he's like, okay, this guy is a bit crazy, but he's completely fine with it. He's obviously seen it before, so it very much shows that he knows about that. This is actually one of my favorite. The whale who wins a bunch of money at the casino, and then they basically sabotage his plane and bring him back and take all the money back. That's such a good scene. catching the cheaters. You know, the two guys who have the things and they break their hands.
And it cuts to the they think you're going to saw his fingers off.
Yeah.
And then because I like the way that it sets up that they're going to inflict like violence on him, and then you think, and then he takes the saw away, and you think, oh no, they're not, and then the hammer comes out of nowhere, and it's just shot still, isn't it? Like matter of fact.
I don't even like. It's a it's a small thing, but I was watching it again, and the way he sets it up, like you're righty. Can you with the other hand? No, and he's like smash his hand, and I mean, they must have had a prosthetic hand or whatever. But yeah, like as I've broken some fingers, and the idea of someone smashing your hand with a hammer is brutal.
I also think that's the type of violence that's more impactful. I think because I think it's. I've never had my hand be hit by a hammer, but I feel like anything involving everyday objects is more relatable. I think there's nothing more wince-inducing than if you're watching a film and someone stubs their toe, for instance, because you know exactly how that feels.
Quiet place the nail.
Yeah, and I think all those elements are really effective. Like the saw would have been like it would have looked over the top. I guess it's almost in how Scarface is very like buckets and buckets of blood, but just blunt violence is more impactful than over the top violence, I think.
Yeah, I think this kind of, you've got your middle, like going with the saw or going with a knife is like standard, and then you've got the like underspoken, so the hammer.
Yeah,
but I think Scarface goes the other way. Like, no, we're going to use a chainsaw in a bathtub. It's like, oh, that's insane as well.
Yeah.
Then the Joe Pesci's crime spree, like the whole. So in the real story, I think Tony the Ant was his real name. His gang were called the Hole in the Wall Gang because that was their MO, is to create a hole in the wall and stuff. So that was, again, you're like, surely this isn't true. It's like, yeah, no, that's true. Then the slot machine manager, which obviously that's an interesting one. The guy that he tells him off once, and then later on, I think I have it a few scenes later of him firing him.
Yeah.
The codes on the phone are always great when it's like, oh yeah, I'll see you at Charlie's 3 a.m. down the road. I also love when Joe Pesci threatens the banker at Robert DeNiro's house.
Oh yeah,
he tries to, and that's one where as I got older, you understand like the banker is obviously laundering his money, and there's you pay an amount to launder the money. But Joe Pesci is just such a psycho that he's like, no, I gave you my money. You're losing my money. I want my money back. And this is great because it's at the core of the movie is they're both smart in a very particular way. But they're both complete idiots in a particular way as well. And this is Joe Pesci being a complete idiot because you can't beat up the banker. You can. Then there's the plane at the golf. That's real. That really, again, so weird. That really happened. Joe Pesci losing his tail, which is very like Goodfellas. The desert fight with that shot. That's probably. Oh, here's a good one as well. What are the most iconic shots? Because the one of Robert De Niro's glasses.
That's my favorite shot in the whole film, easily. I know it's like overly stylized and everything like that, but it's just like I think with certain shots, if you can just take a photo of that image, that just looks really cool.
Yeah, there's nothing subdued about this movie, so like it's not. Did you read what Scorsese's favorite shot was of the whole movie? It's when we first meet Sharon Stone's character and she throws the chips.
Oh yeah,
and there's like a shot that goes overhead of her, and apparently he said in interviews that was his favorite shot of the movie. And then I quite enjoy the unraveling at the end and like just everyone getting killed. There's something satisfying about, especially the second half of the movie, when you just watch all these shitty people doing shitty things and then getting their comeuppance. You're talking about like things that Scorsese has said that differ over the years. So one thing I found that was interesting was he said, apparently it was on the Blu-ray, there's no plot at all. It's 3 hours, no plot, so you know this is going in. There's a lot of action, a lot of story, but no plot. Can you explain to us what the difference there is between story and plot and like what he means by it?
Maybe, I guess you'd probably say this is one of the films where it's maybe a bit more of like a vibe type film. Maybe that's the vibe that the vibe he's going for is making like a vibe type film where it's almost like, because you're being bombarded so much with all this information, it's almost like just don't think about it, just go with it sort of thing. But there's a weird statement to make because it is obviously there are key plot elements that go on in it.
Yeah, I feel like his sort of thing to say to get attention is a bit scandalous or whatever, but it doesn't make it.
I think it's. It might even be he's quite dismissive of the film. because it is sort of like he doesn't bring it up. It's not something.
Yeah, it's one of the sillier ones.
Yeah, and it's not one that because that's why I'm sort of interested in doing this particularly, because it's not everyone knows the name, everyone knows the actors in it, everyone knows it's Scorsese, but it never gets brought up ever. Yeah. So if you'd like, so another podcast I listened to, they drafted his entire filmography.
Oh yeah,
and it was in the bottom 10.
Really?
Someone was like, "Oh, I forgot about that one." then there was someone on it who was like, "Oh no, that's my favorite of all his work." So maybe it's just that it was, I don't know, maybe even the fact that like it was critically acclaimed, but it wasn't as big as Goodfellas. Yeah.
Well, I think it's kind of like if people, I think like me, you have to have that. Maybe someone, this isn't me, but someone like really like Sharon Stone, they would, I guess I could see this one would appeal more to women because of the Sharon Stone character, but there aren't really any big, important female characters in Goodfellas. For me, it's the business, the Vegas thing, which is, but I guess for most people, if you don't have that particular interest, it's like, if I want to see a gangster movie, Robert De Niro and Joe Pesci, I'm just going to watch Goodfellas.
It was also that sort of weird period as well, isn't it? Around during that period, you have obviously had almost like a resurgence in Las Vegas films. Like obviously you had Casino, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, which obviously like a period film. And then Swingers is around that sort of time as well.
I think maybe it's the next base 96,
something like that. Maybe. But yeah, because I think Fear and Loathing's maybe 97. But it feels like all of a sudden, and then not too long later, you obviously have Ocean's 11 come back. It feels like we've gone back to that sort of period again. Maybe it's like, I don't know, maybe people are nostalgic for it growing up, of the glitz and glamour and obviously the Elvis Presley and everything like that. So they've come of age in the 90s and now they're reflecting back on that sort of time, maybe.
Yeah. It is actually another thing that's super interesting is the ending when he explains sort of like what happens to Vegas.
Yeah,
because one of the things, and I love that you said this is a vibe movie, because that is actually one of my main points, is that this is like, I just want to hang out in 70s Vegas, like see some people get killed, like see the inside of these casinos. Like it is, like you're not rewatching it to dissect about the dynamics of their relationship or anything like that. It is about just hanging out in this like beautiful glitzy place, which does not exist anymore. I think that was it. When I was younger, you initially think that this is what Vegas still looks like, but I've been once, and so actually I thought I would love Vegas for going, largely because of movies like this. And then I went there and I did not enjoy it nearly as much. And I think part of it is because Vegas definitely does have a charm. And I think I'm preparing myself to one day go again. But having been, I would have a much better expectation based on like having actually been and as an adult. Because if you just watch movies like this, Swingers, Oceans, you have a very like unrealistic.
Also, maybe it's one of those places that definitely looks better at night. But if you see it in the cold, hard light of day, it's just dust, isn't it?
But yeah, I think this is definitely a romanticized version, and as they admit, because it doesn't exist anymore. I love the end when they're like, "Oh yeah, it's more like a theme park now." But at the same time, it's like, yeah, but it was also run by the mob, and people were getting like robbed and killed all the time. So maybe it wasn't all good. But yeah, so after spending 20 minutes on the story, all that to say, the story is not that important. Production, everything that we'll talk about is great for the vibe, but the actors and characters are very interesting here. So let's talk about Sharon Stone.
Okay.
What do you think about, I guess, her character and her performance?
So I think she is the best thing in the whole film.
Yeah.
I also think she's the one. So we could get into it a bit later, but I don't think this is as much a companion piece to Goodfellas as people think of it as. But she's the one element that feels new for Scorsese, because he'd done a film in the 70s called Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore, which was his first female lead protagonist film. And then obviously since then he's very much, I feel like you could, if you broadly take his whole filmography, it's about sort of the corruption of like money, the American dream, but a lot of it's like toxic masculinity over and over again. And Sharon Stone's the first new element that's bringing to it, because you don't really focus on female characters that much. She's also like the tragic character in the whole film, because is it Lester? James Woods' character, like you just in those brief sort of moments, you realise she's basically been used and abused her entire life, and then it leads to like she has one of the most naturally tragic endings as well, because she's probably the one character that you can sort of almost say that she didn't necessarily bring it on herself. She's a product of everything that's happened to her. So I think that's really interesting. Whereas I guess the mob guys, they're almost sort of, they can
They chose.
Yeah. But what's straight interesting to me is that like so many people, well, I say people, mainly men, don't like her character, and they think she's like too much, and they're not like, I don't know. The one thing was that she's too screechy, or she's overacting was a word, I think, but it was just like I don't see that at all. I think it's maybe the most freshest thing in the Scorsese film up to that point, I think.
Yeah, I agree with most of what you said. That screeching, whatever, like that's all just sexist bullshit.
Yeah.
I can see, like, if someone just pops into certain scenes, and as I said, like there are certain scenes which she's going back and forth between them that I do find a bit like, we get it. And I think part of it is because it's anxiety inducing, because like everyone's terrible in this, like no one's good, but you're like, you feel bad for her because she's stuck in a situation, you feel bad for De Niro because he's obviously being like used and whatever and like betrayed, and they're just horrible scenes to watch. They're not fun. So I'm always like, oh, I think there's a chunk in maybe the third, fifth where they spend like 20-30 minutes on them, and I got a bit, and then they spend 20-30 minutes back on the mob stuff, and it's like, okay, we're back, and then it's like, then there's the whole thing with her taking the money, and then the scene with like the kids and stuff is like horrible. So that's my whole thing about how the fact that she's 100% the best actress in this, she's the most exactly refreshing, interesting thing, but it's not necessarily like a fun thing to watch. Like if it was a whole movie just about that, I would not be like rewatching it.
I think that was the one thing that brought up as well, because there's actually, like I said earlier, there's not many people discuss this film, but when you discuss it, people are just like, oh, I just wanted her to die. And it's just like, but it's that weird thing where I think people could, based on the style and everything of this film, people can read into this film in an incorrect way. Like, I don't think Martin Scorsese is trying to say that Robert De Niro and Joe Pesci, like, oh, these are the good guys. These are the guys you're supposed to be like side with. Get rid of her. I think it's almost the opposite way, but people can view it in a different way.
So we absolutely will. This is the time to get into that. And also something that I realized that I hadn't gotten to, and you brought it up perfectly. This movie follows perfectly in the Scorsese theme of crime movie. Technically, I figured The Aviator, but he's obviously not a criminal. But I listed out 5 movies. So obviously, Goodfellas, this, The Departed, Wolf of Wall Street, with someone who's like, it's the rise to power of the criminal, then sort of seeing what happens at the top, and they always basically it's always greed. They go too far, they want more money, and then paranoia, and
that's
then
why
like,
Killers is so important.
Yeah, sorry,
Killers is like the birth of everything. Yeah,
Killers was the 5th one. Yeah, you're right.
Because that's like
and The Irishman as well, actually.
Yeah, so I think Killers is like him basically being like, this is almost the origin of all his other crime films, and then The Irishman's the ending. Like, what's like, none of this is going to end well. You're all just going to end up old.
Yeah. Well, at least they don't die in that one.
Yeah.
But so people like Goodfellas, a lot of people, Italian Americans like love it and stuff, and people say, oh, this glamorizes violence, but almost a bit like, it had nothing to do with Scorsese, but people say that with like Fight Club, it glamorizes it. It's like, I can see how obviously a lot of people will watch it with a simple mind and not analyze it. But the fact is, any of these movies, if you pay any attention to it, the point is the complete opposite. I think Scorsese says it. He's mocking these people. He's like, and like beyond it in life, I always think I cannot understand anyone who would watch these movies and then go into this life of crime, because it looks so dangerous and so scary, and it always ends bad. Like you either end up being forced to snitch and then people come after you, or you don't snitch and you spend the rest of your life in jail, or you get whacked. Like I don't think it's any way saying like that these guys are like good or anything. So coming back to her character, I think it's super interesting, because if you just look at those later scenes that are not pleasant, you can be like, oh yeah, she's manipulating him, blah, blah, blah. But it's those early scenes when you see how she goes into the marriage. She basically tells him, I don't love you and I don't want to marry you. And he basically bribes her and he says, I'll give you like $1 million and maybe you'll like learn to love me, blah, blah, blah. And if you watch that scene and you show her reluctance, like obviously she's not a good person, because a good person, a perfect person would still be like, no amount of money is going to do that. But we know who she is. And especially when you understand like her addiction to like money and like all the glitz and glamour, she basically she did have a choice, but it was an impossible deal to refuse. And then when you see the whole James Woods dynamic, that's next level. Like she never stood a chance. Like,
no, she's essentially like a victim of sex trafficking all the way through.
100%.
And all James Woods, Joe Pesci, Robert De Niro, they're all using her for something, and they're basically plying her with drugs and alcohol the entire film. or in like Robert De Niro's money, diamonds, everything like that, then she's just used as an object.
100%.
And then she's passed around between all these men constantly.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about him then. James Woods is obviously a small, and he apparently is a terrible person in real life.
Oh, now he is, yeah.
But we will not let that affect that. I think he is like, low key great in this, and he's small role, but it is so important because again, without him, her character just I don't think quite works. And the thing, usually when you've got this dynamic, you have that situation where you see the two people interact, and you're like, "What's wrong with her? What does she see in this guy? He's obviously a creep." He's all, not with him. You're like, "Oh, you're like 2 minutes." The conversation. I think there's like 2 or 3. The first time he's introduced. Maybe that one's less effective, but especially the wedding one, when he's just whispering these nice things and he's bringing up the fact that she's known him since she was a girl. And it's like, yeah, this guy has his hooks. I mean, they dance around it. It's clear if you pay attention, but he is a pimp and she was a hooker. So like, if you, there's a slight tangent that I might cut out, but have you ever heard of Iceberg Slim?
No.
He's quite famous because Dave Chappelle talked about him in a bit, but he was this real life pimp who wrote a book. I think it's just called Pimp, and it's written in the vocabulary of a pimp, and from the point of view, it's basically him saying how he became a pimp and how he just got women, basically made them fall in love with him, treated them like shit, and turned them into hookers for him. This reminded me of that, as you can absolutely see how, because he's super nice with her, those 2 scenes, but then later on when they're running around, he treats her like complete shit. He hits her, but he's a terrible, terrible person. But you can see how he knows exactly what to do, and he probably found her when she was 15 years old. Probably the first person she had sex with. Get her into drugs and alcohol, taught her everything she knows, and now no matter what, she's always going to be addicted to him. And so a lot of what she does, you're like, she's.
Did you also get the vibe as well that the men are supposed to be like quite a lot older than her as well? I couldn't ever work out what age they're trying to portray her as.
It is confusing because Robert De Niro says at one point that he's like 43, I think, but he's 52 when the movie comes out.
Okay.
So he's definitely playing younger than he was.
Yeah, because the vibe, he comes across as an older man.
Yeah, and the real guy was when you see him on the TV show, he was like white hair and I mean, obviously it was a different time, but he seems a lot older. And then she, on the contrary, she was 37. This came out, but and obviously the movie takes place over a span of like 10, 15 years. But it definitely feels like she was meant to be younger. So maybe she got into her 30s. So there could easily have been a 15, 20 year age difference. And then James Woods, I think, is, they're all the actors, all the male actors are in their 50s and she's in her 30s. Yeah. So there definitely is meant to be an age gap, which is, it's one of those, it's creepy, but it's meant to be. It's not like one of those where it's supposed to be romantic and you're like, wait a second.
Yeah. And also what's interesting with Sharon Stone as well is the way that she is treated in real life as well, like with Basic Instinct and with this, and then she's basically gone, which is so strange. You'd think after getting this sort of like these, did you say she won the award?
She was nominated.
Just getting a nomination. Then she's gone.
Only nomination she's ever had.
Yeah, it's mad, isn't it? And then she's gone. I know she talks about being treated like crap through Hollywood as well, so it's almost like it's reflecting real life.
And the stories about her getting the role are like super interesting. How her audition with Scorsese got cancelled twice, and she thought that he was like blowing her off, but he's Martin Scorsese, he's busy. And then the third time she blew it off, but he apparently like tracked her down and was like, no, I want it to be you. A bunch of people apparently who were considered for it were Michelle Pfeiffer, but she didn't want to do it because it was too similar to Scarface. Nicole Kidman, Melanie Griffith, Rene Russo, Cameron Diaz, Uma Thurman. But she's perfect.
I feel like out of that list, like Michelle Pfeiffer's the only one that would have been able to do it justice, I think.
I agree. Oh, Madonna apparently was actually cast for it, but Sharon Stone convinced Scorsese to give it to her. So we've talked about James Woods. Oh yeah, this is a fun anecdote about him. Apparently, James Woods heard that Scorsese was interested in working with him, and he made sure that a message got to him saying, anytime, any place, any part, anything. Which, fair enough. Basically, the Jonah Hill thing he did with Wolf of Wall Street. So obviously, we do have to talk about the two main men, Robert De Niro and Joe Pesci. Let's start with Joe Pesci. Like, do you think this character is basically the same as in Goodfellas, or are there subtle differences?
I think it's sort of if you broadly look at it as like he's almost playing the same stereotype. like the next level of like brutality as well. And I also feel you get a bit more of his character comes through a bit more, because there's a lot more sort of like conversations that take place. But yeah, I think because, I mean, that's probably where these comparisons come from. It's really weird to hire the same people, and he's almost hired like almost as the same character, but like up in the ante a little bit more.
Because in Goodfellas, he obviously does crazy stuff.
Yeah.
But it is De Niro who sinks the crew in the end, because he's very different. He's completely crazy in a more subdued way as Joe Pesci's character in Goodfellas. But yeah, and I think he's more of just a hired goon there. Whereas in Casino, the power gets to his head. He thinks he runs the city and everything. Him and Sharon Stone are the ones that kind of sink the ship. But it's like, if Joe Pesci wasn't getting involved with her, that could have probably gone differently. So he's the main instigator of everything going to shit. Because as much as, you don't feel too much sympathy for Robert De Niro, you are like, oh, come on, man, you had a good thing and he's ruining it. Because, there's no situation where Joe Pesci's character doesn't end up. Like, he's on a one-way street down that hole.
He's a lot more yappy in this as well.
Yeah.
I think he's a lot more like Joe. So in Goodfellas, obviously, he's a lot more like quietly intimidating. Like, he talks only, like, even the funny house scene, he's not like doing his Joe Pesci isms. Whereas this is almost
That's
like
one of my favorites.
He's a lot more high pitched, isn't he? And he's a lot more sort of like, he almost seems like a sort of like a dog that's been let off a leash a little bit more in this. So it's a bit more like erratic. But yeah, I guess broadly you could say it's the same sort of stereotype, but just upped up a bit more, and you get to know him a lot more.
And then, so the De Niro character is very different. So obviously he is the more subdued psycho in Goodfellas, whereas here he's the straight guy. But he does kind of go off the rails in his own way in like the second half of the movie with all the. And I was actually wondering if this is a weakness in the performance, because there's no hint in the first hour that he has
rage inside him.
Rage, and I mean, I wouldn't even call it rage, but that he's an egomaniac, and that he's not going to accept to be slighted. He really seems like he's like a.
You don't get the vibe that he wants fame,
or even riches. You see, like he's this guy who's extremely talented, that's part of a machine, and he's perfectly happy being that, and that would just sort of, if. But maybe I think maybe the idea, as I'm saying it, I'm realizing, is that he was this handicapper who was then put in this position of power, and he got there and was like, oh, I really like this. The one actually good indication that he was in the egomania from the beginning is the way he dresses, because he obviously
pastel suits.
But just like the fashion, the flamboyancy, he obviously does want to be noticed, and he does. And I bet there's a fashion article somewhere that analyzes how his outfits evolve throughout, and how once he goes into the pastels, he's like, oh, I'm on top of the world. But his egomania definitely like drives them. So I guess he does have his share in everything going to shit.
He's just got the less to do out of anyone in this film, I think.
Yeah.
Especially if you come across like all his performances up until that point. I mean, it's like, it's 95, so I think Cape Fear was in 91, and that's such an over-the-top, like, melodramatic, like, he's playing like the shark in Jaws in that film. He's so like full of rage, and in this he doesn't have that. So even bits where he's like the fight with Ginger on the lawn when she drives into his car, he stood still the whole time. He's like, and he's stood still in the dressing gown going, oh, like that. He's not even, he doesn't have to have much to do. And then he obviously then does play. Yeah, it's weird, isn't it? Because when you see him in the chat show things, he has been a bit more of like what you'd think of as like an old fashioned chat show host, like lots more charisma to him. And then in his private scenes, he's very subdued. Like the bit in the desert with Joe Pesci and Robert De Niro, Joe Pesci's like full of rage, and he's like, oh, like that. It's almost what you think of as like old man De Niro.
Well, I think there's a lot of what you just said to unpack there. When he's on the lawn, I think it's because he's got his public persona. He knows the neighbors are watching, the police are watching. Because then when he's alone with her, I think it's after that when she comes back, he does like berate her and say, you'll have the beeper, I don't trust you, you're like a crack whore, you spend all my money. So he does have that rage inside him. But then I think when he's with Joe Pesci, he's scared of him, rightfully so. And that is one of the things, like, at the end of the day, one of Joe Pesci's biggest criticisms of him and why he thinks he deserves to run the city is because he sees Robert De Niro's character as being weak.
Yeah.
And he is. Like, his talent is, like, brain power and management. of a casino, clearly not a criminal organization. But there are numerous things where he's like weak and he needs the Joe Pesci character. So
yeah, he wouldn't be able to. He's not got much violence in him at all, has he? So he's like
he can order it, but he would never do it. But even when Joe Pesci's there, that he comes into the casino and he's like berating like the dealer and then Don Rickles, which is horrible. I hate that's the one someone getting hurt. I was like, hey, don't hit Don Rickles with a telephone.
Well, he's basically playing like if you like it's not a nice word, but he's basically playing like a cook the whole film.
Yes, that's exactly.
So for the mob. For like everyone, he's just like,
yeah, no, that's exact. So I have it that he is weak and a cuck is exact. I mean, and he literally is. But yeah, so and it's not a character you like. Like you would never bring up Ace as like a fun character or whatever. But if that was the mission, Robert, especially someone that we know can be a tough guy, because in Goodfellas he's a scary motherfucker, and this is in the recasting. Like you needed to find, you couldn't get someone too tough. And obviously Robert De Niro is tough, but he doesn't have any. He plays soft in this as he's meant to. Let's move on to the dialogue and the script. So I think a good place to start is the comparison with Goodfellas, because I like the script in this. It's got the same vibe, but I can't really think of any like quotes. Like it's not. There's sections that are great, and I looked up like quotes from this, and you see like whole sections, but there is no, like you said earlier, like, the Goodfellas, like funny how, like that is just, there's nothing like that in this.
I mean, also with Goodfellas as well, you remember that opening narration. So like there's everything. Yeah, there's just moments in it. Whereas I guess with this, I think maybe watching it again, the things that come back to me, I think of it, the visuals more than the dialogue in this.
100% agree. Yeah. Apparently, I don't know if this is true from Goodfellas, maybe you know, but apparently, it's probably exaggerated, but Scorsese, a lot of it was improvised. He basically would say, guys, this is what needs to happen in this scene, which it's just funny because you think of that as like a Judd Apatow movie with like comedians. You don't think of it as like dramatic actors, but it's probably when he'd seen them do what they'd done in Goodfellas. It's like, yeah, I trust you guys. And they obviously, I mean, they don't speak like that naturally, but the two of them are very fluent in all of that. So definitely the script is not like one of the strongest points, unlike in Goodfellas. Here's one quote. I was looking for like interesting quotes, and here's one that came up, but I think it's a bad quote. So we can see what you think. He says it early on when he's telling off the stupid employee. There are 3 ways of doing things around here: the right way, the wrong way, and the way I do it. You understand? That sounds good, but it's kind of stupid. What does that mean?
You don't know as well.
That your way of doing it is neither right nor wrong.
And also, it's like, when you're just reading it out there, it's not something that rolls off the tip of the tongue,
no.
In terms of a quote either.
I think the scenes that I'm pretty sure probably were scripted were the Sharon Stone, Robert De Niro scenes, especially like the fight ones. But because those are the most dramatic scenes, the most tense scenes. And you said those are the ones you probably enjoy the most, the most interesting.
So I think it's because it's like it cuts down to like real life. So it's almost like there's a director that I know Scorsese was like almost mentored by in the early, because John Cassavetes, but it mentions it in the Conversations with Scorsese book. But Scorsese says this is a world that he had no knowledge of, and he didn't like the broad world. He didn't find interest in, but he said he knows people.
Of the mob or Vegas? Or
Vegas. And well, that level of mob as well. Right. He says he's more interested in the neighborhood type goings on, which is what obviously Goodfellas is about. And this was something that he wasn't broadly interested in, because in part of the book as well, he said this was basically a package deal with Cape Fear for Universal. So this is one of the things where it's, like you said, it's brought to him and then he hears about it. But so his big thing is people, I think. So I just feel that like it just feels more, those scenes breathe more and they just feel more real, and I think that's when you get to know people a bit more in the film. They get to know the characters a lot more, and it just feels more not it's not our house, but more an independent cinema type vibe to it. And I do I think I've said before, like I find some like scenes of conversations and dialogue as exciting as visual like blockbuster like scenes. Like those, the character stuff is probably things that I remember more and that like speak to me more personally. I was more exciting than sort of the flashy side of things, which is probably another reason why the first hour I'm like, get to the people.
Well, I always say, like, doing this podcast has made me realize that, like, obviously everyone has a different approach to almost every movie, and most people, movies that you like, there's something that hooks you.
Yeah.
And there's like, and the more you watch it, the more you see everything else. But it's always what that original hook is. And I think for me, it was the understanding how Vegas works. And everything else I enjoy like that. So, and this is very much far away from that. So it's probably at the end of the net for me. Whereas for you, you're like, oh yeah, this was my hook. It makes sense that that's much more at the center of it for you. Yeah,
because also if you look back at his past stuff as well, even like his past, like something like Mean Streets, for example, it's very much like dynamics between people. Like Goodfellas has more style to it, but again, it's about these same people, these neighborhood people. And this is obviously like, so I feel like this is less comparison to Goodfellas. And I think it's compared to Goodfellas because it came out not too long after, same author, same returning characters, and it's about the mob. But I think that's where it ends, basically. I feel like this is more in comparison to the Wolf of Wall Street than anything else.
With the conversations with Leo and Margot Robbie.
And Leo and Margot Robbie feels very much like these guys in Casino. It's almost like this is his first, because I think it's quite interesting that people generally, I think maybe one of the first things people think of when they think of Scorsese is, oh, he's the gangster guy. But that's actually not that big portion of his whole filmography. He's done loads of stuff. And I think it's interesting that he didn't go back to mob stuff after this for years and years. He didn't work with De Niro and Joe Pesci again until The Irishman.
Yeah, he didn't do. There were no. He obviously didn't work with them until The Irishman, but I don't think he did anything. I guess he did other types of crime.
And like The Departed is a bit different because it's not. You're not stuck with the mob the whole way through, are you? There's various different characters. That's more of like a. I mean, it's based on like a Japanese like cop drama.
Oh, is it?
And then obviously Gangs of New York is almost like, it's not the mob as we know it.
The Departed, it obviously involves the mob, but you don't actually see that much of the mob side. It's like very much the police side. We obviously Matt Damon being on the cover there, and then it's just occasional. So it's much more about police than it is about the mob.
Because he basically says in this book, this is as far as he was ever going to go. He was like, that's like the broadest sort of mob film he's made.
And then Netflix brought the money truck. He made The Irishman.
But then I guess with The Irishman, that's more, again, it's more of a character study, isn't it? Again, and it's about like going back to the end of the life of the mob. It's like him. Yeah, because it is really interesting that he just doesn't work with these guys again that it would been decades. 25 years.
Yeah, I mean, they probably were all like, we've had our fill of each other. We don't want to do, because they were already probably pigeonholed after doing Casino. Both of them. So
and then after this, De Niro basically for a long time becomes like a family-friendly comedian.
Yeah,
he was in Rocky and Bullwinkle, and the Meet the Parents films, and is it like Bad Grandpa? He becomes like a bit more of a like yeah.
So next we'll move on to production, but before that, we'll have a little segment brought to our sponsors at Concave Brand Tracking. Danny also works with me for Concave, so you should actually be much more able to answer this than the average person. What do you think, without actually having done it, what do you think the number one brand in this movie is? And I think it's not even close.
Number one brand. There's not a lot of car stuff in it, particularly, is there? It's the car. It's the car.
It's pretty much the car brand that all the men drive constantly.
Oh, I feel like it's not. Is it Chef?
Cadillac,
right? Okay.
So it's Cadillac, the car that blows up, right? And then they will him and Pesci drive Cadillacs all the time. And
I think I should have thought that because that was a big thing back then as well, wasn't it? Getting a Cadillac was like a big sign.
And all I think every single mobster in this drives the Cadillac. So Cadillac by far is the biggest one. Yeah, obviously there's some. I think most of the casino brands that are mentioned, obviously the Tangiers wasn't real, but a lot of the brands that mentioned that were real don't exist anymore.
Because that's interesting as well with the Tangiers. I would think, oh yeah, that's a casino in Las Vegas, I think, and I don't know why.
Yeah, I think they must maybe legal things like they changed even though everything is very close to the book. They changed all the names a little bit. They changed the name of that. So it's probably just to protect it, or because it was a little bit too close to home. One other last brand mention is James Woods. I think it's the scene where when he's confronted by Robert De Niro, he wears a very distinctive Gucci jacket with the colors down the sleeves and stuff. Moving on to the production. So as you said, and I massively agree that this movie is a vibe movie, and so it looks amazing, it feels amazing. I think one of the things is that this movie came out in '95, which now we're like, oh, that was decades ago, 1970s. it's 25 years after. This movie feels like it was really, like, not only looked, but it feels like it was made in the 70s.
Yeah.
And a lot of that is, well, I guess it's the sets, it's the way it's shot, the costumes.
Yeah.
Or like, have you read anything about the costumes?
No.
So De Niro had, I think, 70 different outfits.
Okay.
And it was $1 million budget for the costumes.
Okay.
Sharon Stone had about 40, and both were able to keep all the costumes afterwards. So that's like a great bonus. Another thing is the music. Apparently, they spent $3 million just on the soundtrack.
Well, there's a lot of Rolling Stones.
Lots of Rolling Stones. And they think they had like 30 different songs because at 3 hours, and he just song after song after song. And yeah, I don't know if they are exactly era specific, but like having
it evokes it.
Yeah, it evokes it. And yeah, it is just. Yeah, it's a great hang. It's a great atmosphere.
It feels real. I think it feels like they actually, like, even if there's scenes on sets, it feels like every room looks like it's.
So it is most. It is most. It was. I think almost the whole film was filmed in Vegas.
Okay.
A lot of it was filmed in a real casino. Apparently, they would film something sometime in the middle of the night.
Right. Okay.
They would shut down a part so they could film it. So it's filmed in a real casino. So it is real. The one thing that wasn't real was the count room, because the casino's like, no, we're not going to let you in there. So the count room was built on a set, but I think it was a set still in Vegas. All the outdoor stuff is pretty much shot in Vegas. So yeah, it feels real because it is. But they must have done the Once Upon a Time in Hollywood thing because with Los Angeles, because obviously this was filmed in the 90s where it changed a lot, but they obviously did a great job at making it look like 70s Vegas. But yeah, what's your we talked about it in passing, but what's your thought on the use of the voiceover? Because they do that a lot.
So I feel like it is quite excessive at points, because I feel like there's definitely scenes in it where a voiceover comes on where the visuals already telling me what's happening. So, and it's almost like, because if you turn off I'd be interested in if you got rid of some of the narration, whether it would still work. Because I think the visuals are really doing the job of it.
I think if you literally did that, if you found an edit where it was the exact same movie and you got rid of the voiceover, I do not think it would work because it's built around the voiceover. Like, it depends on it. I definitely do think there are some scenes where it's not necessary, but I think a lot of scenes it kind of is, especially because of all the explaining stuff. Like, they couldn't show you the count room and you would understand everything. It needs to be explained to you. So, because there's that. I mean, I'm sure you've read that and you probably feel it to a certain extent that like using voiceovers is almost seen like cheating in movies, because
it's that whole show don't tell thing. I think, and I think if it's like a stylistic thing, it doesn't bother me at all. But I don't. There's definitely been the sort of a move back towards it in a lot of modern movies at the moment, where it's almost like, oh, let me just, if for those in the back, let me just explain this, or like, let me show you how that was all done, and then you get this whole sort of backstory. Obviously, they do it in a different way in The Big Short. They actually cut to people, don't they? And they'll be like, this will be, but that's where the narration would normally go, I guess. There was it does calm down a bit. That first hour's voice is so much narration. And it would just keep cutting back. So it'd be Robert De Niro, then it's Joe Pesci. And it would just keep going back and forth over and over again. So, like, if you took the visuals away, it's like listening to a podcast because there's not that many gaps in it. So I do, because I know
he loves it. He does it in Goodfellas, he does it in Wolf of Wall Street.
Yeah.
The Irishman, they didn't, I don't think.
But in Goodfellas, you don't really... when I think of Goodfellas, I don't think of, like, style necessarily. Like, there's obviously... It's probably his most stylistic film up to that point. But that's not what I think of when I think of Goodfellas. But whereas this, it's the visuals and the style. And it's almost like, because it worked in Goodfellas, maybe that's why people compare it as well. It's like bringing over some of the same sort of stylistic elements to it. And like you're saying, if he's obviously doesn't want to leave anything behind in the book. So that's where the narration's coming into it.
Yeah, that was going to be my next point, is that, again, not to keep harping back to the book, but it's impossible to explain. Like, it would have been a 5-hour-long movie if he had to show us everything and he couldn't just like, let me explain in 30 seconds how this business deal went down.
So that's where it's like that when I mentioned earlier about the HBO thing, it's because this should have been a TV show, I think, and expanded on it a bit more. Like, but obviously, I don't know the sort of period back then whether there was much limited series back then.
They wouldn't do it, but yeah,
but it would be now.
They would. I wonder if they would remake it, like literally just not basing it on the exact story because it would just be the same, but making an updated version where they do go into all the details.
Because then it would just I think it would work more as there are certain films where you watch it and you go, this would work as a TV show.
I wouldn't mind watching 15 minutes explaining how the union, the Teamster union money was used instead of it like to fund the casino, rather than it just being a 45-second cut. I'm glad they did it for the film, but yeah, cool. So yeah, beautiful movie, highly produced, lots of style. So that finishes up our 5 main sections. So then I like to move on to the je ne sais quoi, which we think we've kind of already answered, but it's kind of that thing that doesn't fall neatly into another category, but why we like it. And I'll go first because it's more of mine, but we've kind of said it's a vibe movie. This movie feels like you're just hanging out in 70s Vegas for a couple of hours, and yeah, you're with some people that they're fun sometimes, they're a bit crazy sometimes, but you're not really there for them, you're there for the whole scenery. So you're never gonna like watch this movie and like not get into it. You are, unless you're completely not paying attention. Like we said, the music, the sets, the whole Scorseseism of whether it's the shots or the way the guys are talking and stuff. It really does build a whole world around you. And now that you started talking about this idea of like a series, like I'd love like a 10 hours of this. So for me, that is just the je ne sais quoi. It's the vibe. It's like really feeling like you're there.
I think it's also like going back to the style of it. I guess it's the style's almost reflecting the excess of the world that they're in. So I guess 100%. That's why it's like that fits it more. Whereas he's going so to the point of almost on some bits over the top in style, but it's because the story is so excessive.
And Vegas in itself. Vegas is a superficial fake place, so it kind of makes sense that this, it would be weird. I think that's the problem with something like Leaving Las Vegas, is it's such like a deep, profound movie, but it's taking place in like such a superficial place. I mean, obviously it's a great movie, but it's like the thing they match together, and it's easier to, and I think because there's almost a campiness to this movie. With the scene that comes to mind when I say that is when Robert De Niro is like he hasn't got his trousers on before the meeting, and he goes over and puts his like pastel blue, and I think that kind of makes it easier to digest all the gore at the end. Whereas like Goodfellas is grittier. So as I said at the beginning, like Goodfellas is going to be more of like a boys gritty movie, whereas this is just a bit sillier and lighter.
I also think with the when you cut to the violence as well, it's interesting in the way that the violence is all brightly lit as well. You don't really see that excessive violence. There's obviously the scene with the pen and with the clamp with the head is obviously, but even then it feels it's really lit. It feels like it's really there. And then the stuff in the desert.
Those two scenes, they take place in dark. Like that bar is very dark, but there is still, it's
almost like when the violence happens, it's almost like here's the violence. It's like a weird, it's trying to get the balance right, I guess, isn't it? Between like the excess and we're having a good time. And then it's like, oh no, we're having like, this is an awful time. And then the way, I think the death of Joe Pesci at the end is really impactful.
Yeah.
Really, really impactful, because I feel like it's the camera stays still a lot of the time. You're seeing his reaction. You're seeing his brother getting killed first. It's brightly lit. The other gangsters, there's no emotions going on at all.
Yeah, I mean, I disagree with that. There's some emotion. The weirdest thing about that is the fact that I forget what his name is, but
his friend,
white-haired guy,
who's
pretty much been by his side the entire time. He's backed him everything, and he's almost the instigator of it. And he's like, I fucking hate you this whole time.
That's like an interesting part of the film that I wish was expanded on more.
His relationship.
I think
There's a weird thing. I think it's when he's asked by the boss about whether Joe Pesci is sleeping with Sharon Stone.
Then we hear his voice.
And it's like that's almost a bit weird. It's like, wait, it's been 2 hours 30, and we're getting you
because that's a weird stylistic bit as well, because it stops and it pauses, and there's like 5 seconds, and then his voice comes in.
I thought there was something wrong with it. Played last night when I was playing it.
So it's like it'd be interesting to know his exactly. We're not expanding on him, are we, at all? Like you said, he's just sort of by his side the whole time.
Because there's mention of Joe Pesci's brother Dominic, and there are times when I forget that it's not him because he's always there, but because you don't actually see the brother that much. It's this guy, Frankie, I think his name is, or something. But I think that just shows the brutality of the mob is that as soon as someone is not convenient, and I'm sure this guy was pissed off at him because he did ruin it all. But yes, going back to your point, that scene, it's the fact that it's in broad daylight. It's such a weird scene. And I yesterday when I was getting to it, I was like, oh, I can't wait to see Joe Pesci die. But then despite everything, you're like, oh, this is horrible. No one deserves to die like this.
Again, it's like that stubbing your toe thing. I've never been buried alive, but we all know what it's like to lose your breath or get winded, but to have that happen in such a slow way as well.
Yeah, it's horrendous. The all-time ranking for me. So it never made my top 5. It was borderline, 5, 6 type of territory. But now, having rewatched it, I'm gonna put it at 11th. Okay. So the way it's working is, as we go through these movies, I'm going to put them at various points.
I was going to say 11. I think before the rewatch as well, because anytime we spoke about Scorsese, you bring up Casino first out of everything.
Wolf
of Wall Street.
Yeah, Wolf of Wall Street is in my top 5. But
do you think there's a reason why you like those two the most?
Probably the business thing.
Yeah,
probably is. Yeah, I think it's more compelling. I think Goodfellas would definitely make my top 100, and we'll do Goodfellas one day. But yeah, there's just
spoiler alert. Goodfellas, I think, is number 1 of the entire lot.
Yeah, I mean that doesn't surprise me. Yeah, there's some good ones.
I actually did a ranking on my Letterboxd after I listened to the Screen Drafts do it, and I was like, I wonder what mine would be. Yeah, so this would fall in the bottom end of Scorsese for me, but he's such an interesting filmmaker because I think he's made one film that I would say is bad. Bad, not good, terrible.
Which one?
Is Boxcar Bertha. And that's actually, he made that, and then John Cassavetes watched it and got him in a room, and he was like, don't do that ever again. He was like, because he was making a sort of farce, genre type film, right. And he's like, do what you know. and then that's where we got to now. But yeah, because his films, basically, apart from that, are very good to a masterpiece. So even if it's in the bottom, it's still a really good film. That's the thing. It's so it'd be interesting if you had a film like this, whether I would think the same about this if it was from someone that had 5 films.
Yeah, and if this was their best film.
Yeah. And I think maybe in retrospect, I think the TV thing would have worked. But I also think maybe in retrospect, it's probably too close to Goodfellas.
Yeah, I mean, this movie would be very different if it was made by anyone else because it's a very Scorsese. As you said, here's the thing: if someone other than him had made this exact movie, it would have felt like a complete rip-off of Goodfellas. But because it's him, it's he's allowed to rip off his own thing.
Yeah, I guess if you think about it, it is someone's been influenced by Scorsese.
Oh yeah, massively. All right, so we're gonna do our box set draft. The way this works is we've both prepared for this. We are going to we're going to take turns picking 5 movies. We're trying to create the best Vegas box set. So the 2 criteria, and you guys are going to be able to vote for this on YouTube or Instagram. You can find it there. The 2 criteria are if the movie fits the criteria, the theme. So we're not going to nitpick to the other, that doesn't take enough place in Vegas. That's up to you. So if you feel like one of us has put movies that are not, don't vote for us. And then what box set would you prefer? So we're not necessarily going for the highest quality, but just the most popular. So Danny gets to go first. So what is the first movie that you would pick for your Las Vegas movies box set draft?
So I would go for Hard 8 by Paul Thomas Anderson. So it's about essentially gambler. It's an aged gambler meets a young gambler who is awful at gambling. So it's Philip Baker Hall as a mentor to John C. Reilly's younger gambler. So it's the pre-Boogie Nights one. And then Gwyneth Paltrow is also in it that's maybe the bit where it's a bit similar. So it's there's a love interest in it, which is Gwyneth Paltrow, and she also plays the sex worker.
Okay.
And then Samuel L. Jackson plays a significant role in it as well. So it's just a really
great cast.
Yeah. And it shows you more the sort of dingy side of Las Vegas as well.
Yeah.
So, and it goes into the suburbs.
Right. And it is it is the whole movie is in Vegas pretty much.
Yeah, at least big sections of it are, yeah.
So I'm going to go in a very different direction. They were my top 2. I couldn't sure which one to go for, but I've decided to go for Ocean's 11 because it's just, for me, that is the most. I love most of these movies that I've picked, but especially the first one. The whole movie is in Vegas. That is like, it's very good companion to Casino because it's like this. Also, how crazy that this movie came out 6 years later. But basically, it takes place 40 years. It feels like it takes place 40 years later in terms of Vegas. So
it's interesting seeing a director like Steven Soderbergh as well, who would probably fit more in like sort of like in American indie side of things, a bit more experimental. And it's like him making like a big crime film. It's a bit like feels like a natural sort of follow when he made Out of Sight as well, like a few years earlier. And it's very like poppy, isn't it, as well?
Back to you. I will know that obviously we are allowed to pick Casino.
Okay, got a left field one. I don't know how to pick that straight away.
Yeah, I think if you want to be strategic here, there are ones that you think that I might pick. You want to be picking first.
Okay, based on the sort of topic that we're thinking out with Casino, I'm going to go for The Godfather Part 2. So you're almost seeing what we don't see in Casino, but we see like the
the
behind the scenes.
That is interesting. Again, the people can decide. My one on that is one that's borderline in terms of it's only a little, like it's probably like 20-30 minutes of the movie that takes place on that, but
they discuss it a lot all the way through the film, don't they?
Again, we're very different box sets that we're building here. I'm curious, was Ocean's 11 on your list?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm gonna have to put The Hangover next on mine.
Okay. That did not make my 10.
No, I mean, it's obviously a very different type of movie of that, but I'm pretty sure if you ask most people like what their number one Casino, not Casino movie.
Probably the film they think of instantly, I think.
Yeah,
maybe.
So I'm putting that. All right, back to you, number 3.
So I'm going to go with Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas.
I've seen that one once, and I just found it very, very strange. Do you like it as a movie?
Yeah, and I love the book as well. And it really captures the visuals and it really. So when you're reading the book, so I think I read the book first, and then it's one of those where you're like, oh, how would this work as a film? And then you watch the film, but obviously Terry Gilliam's a very like fantastical filmmaker, and obviously that deals with like the excess of Las Vegas as well, and all the visuals are like it's like that's very stylistic as well. There's a lot going on all the time. It feels very stressful and manic.
Yeah, that's what I remember. It feels like what an acid trip is in the worst possible way. The anxiety. Okay, I think at number 3 I am going to go Casino, which I think we've talked about enough for today. So back to you at number 4.
So I've got 2 left. I'm going to go with Showgirls by Paul Verhoeven.
I have that one lower on my list as like a backup. What are your thoughts on that movie?
If you asked me when I was a 14-year-old lad, it was a little perv, catching it and being like, I've never seen anything like this in my life. I think I was watching it for very different reasons back when I was 14. But like, yeah, it's definitely...
It's a Vegas movie.
Yeah. And it definitely deals with like the dark side of Vegas, isn't it? And it's like the way that people are treated in that film. Yeah. But also it's just, I think it's also a film that's misjudged at first because Paul Verhoeven's like he obviously made RoboCop, Starship Troopers. Benedetta came out recently as well. He's very much seen as like, he's exploitation filmmaking, but it's like he's taken exploitation, but actually satirizing the whole thing. It's really smart. So I think at the time people like
took it too
literally. Yeah. I think it's really interesting, especially it's more interesting watching it as an adult and also watching it after it was panned. It's one of those films that people would have said is one of the worst films I've ever seen. It's definitely changed course now.
I'd heard that and then watched it and was like, I can see its weaknesses, but I enjoyed it. And it is like I had it. Obviously, we're stopping at 5, but in case you picked a bunch of mine, I had it at 8th on mine. Because I hadn't actually included Casino here, and I've put it in there, so I'm now really struggling over which one. I don't entirely agree with this one, but again, it's one that's commonly associated with Vegas, and it is one of my favorite movies. I'm gonna put Swingers.
Okay.
But the thing I don't love about that is that I don't think it's a very positive depiction of Vegas because. I mean, it's actually the most honest depiction of Vegas and how anticlimactic it is to be like, Vegas, baby! And then getting there and be like, okay, well, we lost a lot of money and everything.
They do it in Knocked Up as well, don't they? Where Paul Rudd and Seth Rogen go to Vegas for a trip and they're like, oh, this is awful, get me home.
Did they even show Vegas there? Because I just remember the car trip being iconic.
They show them going to Cirque du Soleil.
Right.
And then...
Because that's the one where there's like, when they say, you know why you're gay?
Yeah.
Okay, so and your last one?
So this one's more of a left field one.
Okay.
And it's probably not something you think of when you say Las Vegas, you probably don't think of this, but I'm going to go for Blade Runner 2049.
Yeah, I did come up in my research because when he finds Harrison Ford, he's in Vegas, right?
Yeah, and that's like I think Blade Runner 2049 is probably one of the most beautiful films ever filmed. It looks incredible. And that particular set in Vegas as well is very like striking. And I just love the fact that even after all humanity's gone and it's just a big red desert, there's still a hologram Elvis performing on the stage.
So my last one, I'm gonna put 21, the Blackjack movie.
I've not seen that.
Yeah, it's
so there was that and Now You See Me as well.
Yeah, I don't like those.
I've not seen that either.
The one that I bumped was A Lucky You, the Eric Bana poker movie. It's one of they're not that, given how big poker is.
Yeah.
And obviously Rounders doesn't take place in Vegas. It's him as a gambler as a poker player in Vegas, and Drew Barrymore as well. It's not amazing, but like if you like poker, it's like a pretty good depiction of how poker works, how the poker underworld works, and it's a very Vegas movie because it shows people actually live there as professional gamblers.
That reminds me now that you've brought it up. Isn't that Win It All with Jake Johnson in? That's a Las Vegas film. He plays a gambler. It might not be Las Vegas. Maybe I'm just sticking on the gambling.
No, I don't think it's in Vegas. Right. Yeah, you've seen that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a horrible movie. Like
I love him. That's the thing. He's very even in bad stuff. He's very watchable.
Well, it's not a bad movie. It's just it's a painful movie to watch because just any of those gambling, like there's The Gambler, the original, the Mark Wahlberg, where those are just painful movies to watch. These people destroy their lives. Your 5 are Hard 8, Godfather Part 2, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, Showgirls, and Blade Runner 2049.
You have a very good time with all of that. You're not going to be depressed at all.
Or if you do want to have fun, you can vote for Dom's Vegas box set, Ocean's 11, The Hangover, Casino, Swingers, and 21. So the ones I left out were Bugsy. Have you seen that?
Oh, yeah.
That's a great history of Leaving Las Vegas. Then I had Showgirls. Then I had Wildcard, the Jason Statham movie.
I'm not seeing that.
It's not good, but it's.
Well, you said Jason Statham movie, so I assume not.
And then I put as a last, I did put the Elvis movie because that. What about you?
I had Elvis. Because the Las Vegas stuff in Elvis is a lot longer than I remember. Because obviously I did it for work as well. And when we got to Las Vegas, I was like, we've got an hour of just Las Vegas, and that was when I was like, oh no, because all the instruments and all the stages. So I had Elvis, Casino, Ocean's 11, Up in the Air, and now because he keeps one of the big plot points is he wants to get a photo of Las Vegas.
Oh, I love that movie.
And then Mars Attacks because and then I just love I think the Tom Jones ending in Las Vegas where it's all crumpled down is incredible.
I've only seen that once. I'd forgotten the exact detail, but yeah, some good choices. So if you guys want other Vegas movies, we've just given you about 20. But just recapping one more time, and go onto our community on YouTube or onto Instagram. Go onto the polls stories to find this whenever you watch this. You can vote for Danny's Las Vegas box set with Hard 8, The Godfather Part 2, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, Showgirls, Blade Runner 2049, or you can vote for mine, Ocean's 11, The Hangover, Casino, Swingers, and 21. So that does it for today's episode. I want to thank Danny for his first time appearing on the podcast. You want to plug anything? Your letterbox, for example?
Yeah, you can follow my letterbox if I get my handle up.
Danny is a very diligent letterbox user. He leaves ratings. He leaves lots of reviews. He makes lots of great lists. So if you think you might agree more with his artsy view of movies than mine, you guys should definitely follow him.
So it's just Danny Jakes 87. Right. If you can guess what year I was born.
We'll put it up on screen as well. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Please subscribe to the channel. Follow us on Instagram. Follow us everywhere. And we'll see you at the next episode. Thank you so much for watching our full episode of Casino. Please make sure to follow us wherever you get your podcast for new episodes on the last Thursday of every month. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel for full video episodes as well as bonus content. Next week, for example, I'll be putting up a video of Danny and I doing a modern recasting of Casino. And you guys get to decide who did a better job. See you then.